It's Wednesday on Jasiri, and across the continent, the headlines are heavy and urgent. South Africa has now taken a historic step by declaring gender-based violence a national disaster, following massive protests and demands for accountability. It's a moment that reminds us how powerful citizens can be when their voices refuse to be ignored. Meanwhile, here in Nigeria, communities continue to grapple with escalating insecurity, from mass abductors of students to attacks on churches and homes across several states. This morning, we're looking at both stories side by side: how nations are responding, where leadership is rising, and where systems are failing, and what it truly takes to protect citizens, especially women and children, in dangerous times.
But first, we've got updates that confirm the release of 24 school children or schoolgirls that were abducted from the government girls' secondary school in Maga in Kebbi State. Now, according to reports, the girls were freed Tuesday morning due to the combined efforts of the Office of the National Security Advisor and the State Security Service. Although the terrorists have now disputed the rescue operation claim by the federal government to say that the girls were freed following a peace deal that they had. Now, regardless of what it was, we're just happy to know that those girls have been freed. But this freedom for the girls comes as another round of abductions have happened. Now, about 11 people, including a pregnant woman, were reportedly kidnapped on Monday evening in Isakpa, a neighboring community in Ekiti local government area of Kwara State. This is barely 1 week after the release of the 38 Christians who were abducted during a live-streamed service. In Kano State, it was also reported that armed bandits raided Yang Chibi and Biresawa villages in Tanyawa local government area, and at least 10 people, including women and girls, were abducted. Now, residents of the area said that the attackers came at midnight and operated for hours without any resistance. The incident has heightened fears not only in the area but also in neighboring Kano towns that share borders with Katsina State.
So one of the headlines, or I think a few of the headlines, are referencing the fact that the girls were freed based on non-kinetic negotiations or non-kinetic means. And I wanted to be sure of what non-kinetic means. So it refers to military or strategic actions that do not involve physical force or conventional weapons, but rather use indirect methods like cyber warfare, psychological operations, and information warfare, to achieve objectives. Now, these actions aim to influence, disrupt, or neutralize an adversary's capabilities and morale without direct physical destruction.
Well, it seems like it's quite different from negotiation. So how was that non-kinetic?
So I don't know, because also we're hearing that the bandits are saying that they refuted the federal government's claims or the federal government's story. And at this point, let's be happy the girls are out, but it just continues to raise a lot of questions. And I think the number one question most Nigerians have is, even if the girls are free, who has been arrested? Who has been taken into custody? Who is responsible? What is going to be their punishment?
That is the main
for this particular crime?
When you are telling, when bandits or supposed terrorists are disputing with the government, they have come out to say, oh, the girls have been rescued. You know, this morning I was just gisting and I was saying, okay, with the amount of hula baloo that was raised when these girls were abducted, at least we want to see what kind of operations did they engage in to be able to get the girls out.
But they might not tell us so that it doesn't endanger future operations of the like.
Oh, please.
Allegedly.
Future operations of the like. Now bandits are disputing. They are disputing with them that no, they were got. So if they say they got them through non-kinetic, whatever English that they used, that the girls were gotten out of, are you telling me that did the government pay ransom? What really was how were the girls really? Because this is going to determine what happens hereafter. Because whatever tactics they use now is the kind of tactics they probably will be employing or deploying every time there's an abduction. So we really need to know, even if they don't tell us exactly what they did, how come the bandits had the audacity to be saying that the government negotiated? That's what they mean.
When bandits come out to challenge the government like that,
it's dangerous.
We have
it's just a bad precedent.
problem because there was a video. I'm going to say it's alleged, but you know, I know you guys don't understand Hausa, and the video.
No, I saw it about the planes flying over.
You're asking the girls, did any planes fly over, and they were like, no, like uncountable. But you know, they were released. There was no warfare. There was nothing. But they were released. There were negotiations, and this actually says poorly of, you know, the government, because everybody is scared, not just in Kano, even in other parts of the country, because
how about it the next time that there are abductions, Tolu? Are we going to keep negotiating?
And that negotiating and
there must be other undertones to it.
Keeps them going.
There have always been
you cannot tell me that there are negotiations and there are no terms reached. At least I know I'm a lawyer. If you're negotiating, that means something gave. They are going to put down some things that they want.
Do we want to talk about what we've seen of negotiations of this sort around the world? There
must be some kind of exchange.
The release of
something
who have already been captured. It's a lot. And we've had conversations about the peace deals. I remember when we talked about the peace deals, bandits are entering towns and having peace deals and demanding hospitals and schools
with their weapons, weapons on them,
and everything weapons. And so when when Nigerians hear negotiation, use all the English words here. People on radio are like, what are you saying? What are you telling us? So whether it's non-negotiation, whether it's ransom, whether it's non-kinetic, whether it's peace deal, what it translates to many Nigerians is that there are ways and means in which these girls and abducted people around the country are being released or freed, but none of it involves justice. None of it involves punishment. None of it involves being arrested. Let us see bandits paraded.
You cannot tell me that you have no idea where these bandits are, because you have journalists, even journalists from abroad going
too far.
in.
They're on TikTok. Bandits are live on TikTok.
But Tolu, if there's an alleged,
is that not a Wi-Fi? Is that not a SIM?
No, what are we saying? If they tell you, if there's an alleged insinuation that they were negotiated with, that there was a peace deal reached, that means they did meet.
No, they did.
They can't tell me they don't know where they are.
So not necessarily they met. They have emissaries. They have individuals who help them negotiate. So those who represent government sometimes.
Our military might. No, Tolu, let me paint the scenario. Our military might stayed somewhere and emissaries were sent and they comfortably negotiated across a table over food or what. And they still allow them to go.
If you hear some of the experiences of these military men, in some way you would actually be grateful that there wasn't any fighting, because most of them are tired. They're tired. They've complained so much, so bitterly about the fact that they don't have weapons, and it
or the
doesn't
weapons
match,
are not the same grade.
It doesn't match, what these terrorists actually are doing. So, in some way, I think the families of those military men at the front line are glad that at least they get to spend more days with their family members.
But look at us civilians, because we are civilians compared to the military. Are we not? Imagine us speculating for them, advocating for them, trying to make sense of the fact that they are to secure us, but what they need to be able to secure the people,
they themselves are not
they do not have it, and you still expect these men to put their lives on the line. There are so many
and let me add to that, you still expect them to put their lives on the line. Meanwhile, they see amnesty programs, they see repentant terrorists, they see repentant bandits being allowed to just come and lay down their arms and sort of have a country open our arms to them. And if you remember the comments of the Inspector General of Police earlier this week, that really also got people fired up when he said, we weren't arresting them because they voluntarily
what does that
all of the speech of many people at certain levels of decision-making and power and responsibility and accountability in Nigeria lay a foundation for how Nigerians question the government stance, how Nigerians question how things are going. You yourself are not reinforcing that we're a country that is about justice, that we're a country that is about punishment. You do a crime, you must pay the time. You must do the time. How do you abduct 24 schoolgirls and we do not see one single
even during the Eruku rescue, did we see anyone arrested? Nothing.
That's what I am saying. They keep telling us that Oh, this, we know when the girls were abducted. Even if you did some clandestine, maneuvers to get the girls out, there is something called a press release where you will tell us. You know, I don't mean give us the details. You don't need to say, oh, we went here. Through the hard work of our officers, a lot of the bandits who have been arrested, we are questioning now. We neutralize their hideouts. Nothing.
Tolu,
we're waiting for it. Maybe we're preempting it. Maybe it will come today or tomorrow. I just
projected into the future right now. When you have, a lot of kidnappings and banditry everywhere in Nigeria, what happens? These same leaders will run away and leave you.
Of course.
Honestly, because it just seems like they're playing politics with people's lives, and it doesn't make sense at all.
If I tell you the word on the streets, even though I know that this is the speculations in the minds of men, it might have absolutely hold no truth.
Leave it. We understand. There are a number of conspiracy theories, unfortunately, that have run rife. And I think also government bears responsibility, because when there is a lack of information, where there is a lack of action, you leave your populace to speculate and to come up with conspiracy theories and to draw dots and connect dots that didn't exist.
That doesn't exist at all.
Explain to us. But more importantly, who is going to be held responsible for the kidnap? Whether it's in Kwara, it's in Kano, it's in Nasarawa, wherever it may be, who are we seeing is being held responsible for the violence, the mental toll, the anguish that people are being put through? It's a question.
It is a big question, and I'm hoping that we get answers very, very soon, because this is forming a precedent, not just for the people.
Not just
this
for
is
those.
Reinforcing our own behavior of distrust, absolute distrust in the government, and it's still giving impetus to the kidnappers.
Even those
fully
in
well
the
that there might be
government need to
nothing.
be held accountable.
Yes.
I think they need to set an example with those in government who are responsible for making sure that there are no such insecurity in the country.
We hope so. We'll be going for a break now, but when we return, we're going to be turning to South Africa, where pressure from women across the country has pushed the government to declare gender-based violence a national disaster. But what does this mean in real terms, and can it drive the systemic change survivors have been waiting for? Spokesperson for Women for Change South Africa, Cameron Kasambala, will be joining us, so please stay with us. We'll be right back.
We turn our attention now to South Africa, where a historic and urgent shift has just occurred. After nationwide protests led by thousands of women, the government of President Cyril Ramaphosa has officially declared gender-based violence and femicide a national disaster, a move that elevates this crisis to a legally binding status. The non-profit Women for Change South Africa drove the campaign, mobilizing mass action with their petition, protest, and a 15-minute lie down across cities. They say this reclassification demands real resource allocation, coordinated government response, and structural reform within policing, justice, health, and social services. With us to break this down is Cameron Kasambala, spokesperson for Women for Change South Africa, to help explain what happened, this moment, what it means now, and what it should mean going forward. Cameron, welcome to Jasiri.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's get started.
Well, Cameron, let's start with how this declaration came to be, because the decision followed mass mobilization, from a viral petition with over 1 million signatures to a national shutdown and silent protests in multiple cities. Now, you've pushed relentlessly, framing GBV not just as a social injustice, but a systemic, life-threatening disaster. This is the moment when activism met policy and South Africa's leadership was forced to respond. Cameron, help us understand what was the crucial turning point and how did you build this momentum?
So for us, we've been pushing for them to declare gender-based violence a national disaster for several months. So we really began pushing for it in April, because on the 11th of April, we did a petition handover to the government in front of our union buildings, where we asked them to declare gender-based violence femicide a national disaster. In response to that, it took several months for us to hear back from them. And when we did hear back from them, essentially they said they had all of the policies and frameworks in place and they were already putting in enough work and did not need to do anything further. However, the statistics in South Africa beg to differ. Over the past year, we saw a 33.8% increase in femicide rates, which has made our femicide rate 6 times the global average. We've also been viewed as the rape capital of the world, with over 117 rape cases reported every single day, and that only being 5% of the cases. So for us, it was indicative that these frameworks and implementation was severely lacking, if it was even being implemented. So we pushed back again and decided, we're holding the G20 event, and this is a moment where international eyes are on South Africa. We're hosting this major event with some of the most powerful leaders across the world, and we're going to use this moment to bring attention to the real lived experience on the ground in South Africa, which is what led us to doing the shutdown.
I need to ask you, these now that this has happened, what does it mean legally and practically to have GBV and femicide declared a national disaster, especially under the South Africa's Disaster Management Act?
So when the president classified gender-based violence as a national disaster, and again, civil society, not necessarily an expert on this, but from our understanding, what it means is that they have now classified it as a national disaster, which means that they will now be implementing existing frameworks and legislations and policies more effectively. So rather than pushing out new bills and policies, they were actively now agreeing to implement the existing ones properly, which is important because South Africa has fantastic comprehensive frameworks. We have the National Strategic Plan to tackle GBV. We have the Domestic Violence Act, Protection from Harassment Act. We don't need new policies or new legislation. We need them to more efficiently implement the existing ones. So some of the things that we can expect to see are the development of a committee that is made up of multi-ministerial civil society as well as private organizations. We're expecting to see improvements in law enforcement, court systems, and overall service delivery. We're expecting to see more actionable changes and more specifically, in those changes, we're expecting to see reports, audits, and complete transparency of exactly where funding is going, how is it being distributed, what are we actively doing, and a clear action plan. But I think for us, we've heard so many promises that what we need to see now is the action. And this classification is important because it's saying to South Africa and the rest of the world that we have a crisis. It is a national disaster, within South Africa, and it needs to be treated as such.
And what you were saying about not having to reintroduce new legislation, it sounds so familiar to us here in Nigeria. Probably sounds familiar to a lot of people across the continent as well. It's not about pretty policies. It's not about signing on to international treaties. It is about enforcing and implementing what you already have. And I think like Nigeria, South Africa has a lot of great legislation addressing this, but we just fail at implementation. So Cameron, we've all seen the headlines, and some people might think that they are sensational. South Africa is the rape capital of the world, or even the latest one that has shaken many people. It's the statistics. Now, according to SAP's crime statistics from April 2023 to March 2024, 5,578 women and 1,656 children. I want to go back to that number. 5,578 women and 1,656 children were killed, with femicide rising by a shocking 33.8% compared to the previous year. 42,569 rape cases were reported, yet according to statistics, again, it's estimated that around 95% of rape cases go unreported. And on average, 15 women are killed every day in South Africa. Cameron, this is difficult to grasp, but let's look at the numbers before we look at the stories behind the numbers. What do you think accounts for the deadly and startling rise in gender-based violence across South Africa?
I think gender-based violence is such a complicated issue. I think it comes from a lot of different places. South Africa, we have a very violent history with the apartheid system that happened in the 1900s. And what it did was it normalized this violent culture. It associated masculinity and power with this controlling, aggressive, and violent behavior. And I think that mentality seeped into the psyche of men, and it kind of passed on through the generations. And that when we speak about intergenerational trauma and that being being an issue. Then we have patriarchal systems, which essentially view women as second-class citizens and as objects. And, you can imagine, if I bump a table, I'm not going to feel bad if I hit the table. But when you view another human being as an object, you have no, empathy or qualms with abusing them. You don't see them as a person. And then within South Africa as well, we have huge issues of unemployment, substance use issues, and these are definitely factors that worsen gender-based violence and femicide, and it has now seeped into the culture and the social norms within South Africa.
All right, Cameron, we would love to hear from your lived experience, right? We only see the headlines, just like Tulu has actually said. But what is the lived realities of many South African women? Can you share some cases with us? Let's move beyond the numbers.
So I think being a woman in South Africa is constantly being in this fight or flight, terrified mode, constantly anxious, constantly worried. And I write a lot of the memorial posts within the organizations as well. So a lot of the femicide cases that we get, you hear the stories. You would know about Uyinene, which was in 2019, where she was raped and killed and burned after going to the post office to collect some of her post. We also had recently Olorato's case in which she went on a date with someone who was out on bail despite them being a repeat offender, who then kidnapped her and killed her. We've had cases also rising up where we are starting to see victim blaming narratives. We had 2 cousins that were killed in Pretoria in South Africa, and there was an alleged story that they had been killed by a man who spent 10,000 rand on them. And this narrative was going on, and people were blaming them and saying, why did they accept this kind of money? For it to also then be false and it actually to be an ex-partner who was retaliating against one of the cousins. And so we also see this victim blaming habit where survivors and victims of femicide come out with these stories, try and get help, and are turned away or shunned by society or blamed for what happened or, treated poorly. Like we have many instances where our survivors will go to the police, try and get help, and they're turned away by the police, either because it's a private family matter or it's something they must deal with on their own, or they'll say things like, oh, it's already happened, like don't make a big deal of this. And then you go into the court systems as well, where they re-traumatize you as well, where you're treated like you are on trial and you need to convince them that this happened, and they ask such like vulgar and violating questions. They ask you things like, how big was it? What color was it? What position were you in? How long did it last? And if you can't answer those questions, then it didn't happen. So you go through this like secondary victimization, we call it, where you are trying to get help for yourself and you're treated like a perpetrator and you're treated so poorly. And so not only are you living in this state of fear constantly, you are also in a system that is designed against you and that protects the perpetrators and abusers.
So before we go on, Cameron, I'm on your website now, and I think we just really need to really emphasize how many women, I apologize if I get this, the pronunciations of the names wrong. Abongeli Matini was 27. She was beaten to death with a golf club by her boyfriend. She was rushed to the hospital and succumbed to her injuries. No arrests. Can you confirm if no arrests have still been made in that case? No arrests have been made, and she leaves behind a 6-year-old child. Let me see who else. There's so many stories that you guys have covered, and I think it's instructive. There's even one of a grandmother that I saw yesterday. Can you tell us that story as well, please?
So, off the top of my head, I don't think I've seen that story. Unfortunately, I've really had to step away from these cases just for my own mental health. But I am aware of another story that did involve a 98-year-old woman. In which she had paid bail for her grandson to get out of prison, and he had brought, I think, 2 of his friends to her home, and they violently raped her. And that case really stuck with me because we see cases like this where the elderly and children are the targets. I mean, I've seen a case that we read where, a 14-hour-old baby was sexually assaulted.
A what?
It's really hard.
14 hour.
A 14-hour-old baby was, sexually assaulted, and and that's why I said I have to step away sometimes from the book because it
breaks you.
It breaks you.
It breaks you.
It weighs so heavily on your soul to see these stories continuously. So it's not fun work, and I wish people understood that this is not a glamorous job. It's not fun stuff. Like, we're not doing this for fame. Like, these are real people with real lives, real people who've lost loved ones who are having to carry this with them for their lives. So
Cameron, you know, just watching you're bringing back yesterday and Monday back to us, because there was hardly any face here on TV that didn't shed a tear, because we had a conversation about sexual and gender-based violence here in Nigeria. Trust me, some of the stories we heard that our guests shared with us were heart-wrenching. I mean, it's unbelievable in some cases, on some levels. But also, it pointed to something very important, and I know we share that commonly in South Africa and Nigeria: the influence of culture and tradition, as well as religion, when we're talking about the issue of gender-based violence. What is the situation like in Nigeria? Do these factors hold as much sway and power as they do here in Nigeria?
I think they definitely do. Within religious spaces, I think they tend to protect their abusers. I think there's a lot of resistance to being seen and carrying the shame of having perpetrators within the church and making the churches look bad. So they hide these perpetrators and they protect them, and they don't expose the violence that happens, behind the closed doors. And there's also this lack of response. I mean, you'll hear women coming forward and saying, I'm being abused by my husband, and because the husband is a powerful leader in the church, nothing will come of it. And they'll say, it's a family matter, it's private. And it's also ingrained in cultures, I think, now, because I think with the history, cultures are shifted by what's happening in the environment and socially. And when you've had such a violent history, it seeps into the culture. And I think people are so defensive and protective of their cultures that they're not willing to acknowledge how rooted in violence their cultures are. And so trying to challenge them, you get such pushback. So I fully agree. The churches and religious institutions, as well as culture, play such a big role in upholding and perpetuating this gender-based violence.
Let's take a quick break. I've disconnected. I'm stuck on the sexual assault of a 14-hour-old baby. Cameron, let's take a break. We'll continue this conversation in just a moment.
Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us on Jasiri. We're still discussing gender-based violence in South Africa, and we still have our guest with us, Cameron Kasambala, spokesperson for Women for Change South Africa. Thank you for staying with us, Cameron. Well, Cameron, now that, gender-based violence is legally a national disaster in South Africa, the conversation turns to implementation and also impact. And this is not just symbolic. It triggers, obligations on all government levels, from policing to social services, justice, health, and even traditional leadership. And it also means a coordinated, multi-sectoral national response. But a declaration doesn't just guarantee change overnight. It must translate into action. So, Cameron, we actually want to know how you feel about the whole thing. Can you help us understand what was the crucial turning point, and how did you build this momentum?
Oh, I think wait, Cameron, I think we've taken that with you,
okay.
But we're looking at concrete measures. Yes.
All right. Okay. So go ahead and just tell us, in terms of prevention, prosecution, care for survivors, and also long-term recovery, what are the next steps?
So I think the thing about being a nonprofit organization is we come from civil society. And so we know as much as the citizens know about what's happening within the government. And in the meetings we've had, they've kind of briefly told us what to expect. But I think what we are hoping to see on the ground and what we're hoping to see happen is we're hoping to see specialized training within the court systems as well as the law enforcement, providing specialized people who are taught on how to handle gender-based violence crimes, counselors that are trained on how to deal with GBV, court systems that know how to manage GBV cases, because I think that if you don't understand the complexities and nuances of GBV and femicide, you will miss things and you won't be able to handle it properly. We have these centers called Tutuzela Care Centers, and they are centers that provide legal, medical, counseling, and support in that way. And they're scattered around the country, and they are a great place for victims to go to when something has happened, because they're given all their support in one space. We're wanting to see more comprehensive sexual education being put out. I think it's scary, but from a young age, we are seeing these signs of, abusive and violent behavior, even with little ones. And so teaching from a young age about consent, about boundaries, about respect, looking also at trying to get our National Sex Registry offenders list published. It's supposed to be published in February, but it hasn't been due to privacy issues, things like that. So we want to see active responses, because I think once we're starting to do the work and we're doing this kind of top-down effect and we trickle down to the grassroots, if systems are in place and if things are structured appropriately, then we can start being more proactive rather than reactive. Because right now, I think also our systems are overwhelmed because they don't know how to deal with these things. Survivors will often go to police, medical spaces like hospitals, and they won't have rape kits for them because they've run out of rape kits, or they'll go to the police to lodge a case, but there's 100, 200, 300 cases that have not been processed, so their cases getting pushed back. So I think we're also overwhelmed, and with this specialized approach, I think it'll help so much in alleviating the burden and allow for us to be more proactive in protecting people.
Cameron, now that you have even talked about all the means, all the things that needs to be done, I know that money would need to be spent. How would these classifications change the way funding is allocated to GBV programs across national and provincial governments? Because all these interventions, medical, policing, everything needs funding.
So I think we lost our connection to Cameron, but while we're working that out, I'm not okay. Let me tell you, let me just be honest. I've been sitting here and I've been trying to be okay. I am not okay. From the stories that Dorothy shared with us when we spoke to her yesterday, to hearing that a 14-hour-old baby was sexually molested, we have got to confront sexual and gender-based violence across the continent. I'm not okay.
The sense of entitlement that men face, that they exude over women, is a bit overwhelming, especially to young children who cannot consent, cannot push back, cannot fight. They are helpless. The only thing that they experience is unimaginable pain. And I'm wondering that we have imagine a child that is broken from when she can barely live. She was just born, just hours on earth, and she has experienced that kind of violence.
Wickedness, the violence.
It's too much. And the things that Dorothy said that we heard yesterday compound, mixing it up with all the things Cameron is saying.
When I hear people say that they do not want to give birth in this society, I really do not blame them.
I understand it,
I don't blame them at all.
Because you cannot protect our...
I told you guys yesterday that I'm almost like a helicopter parent, and I'm trying so hard not to be, so that Corday has life experiences. She can leave the nest without us, but you
can't be with her everywhere. How do you protect her?
Even girl moms to boy moms, everybody is now vulnerable.
Let's go back to Cameron. Cameron, Lola was asking a question about how the classification would change the way funding is allocated for GBV programs across national and provincial governments in South Africa. Will there be a really big impact on this, particularly in the area of funding? We speak to a lot of NGOs that do this work, and one of the biggest issues is funding. Dorothy was telling us about how much it takes to feed just the 25 people who are with her in her foundation, one of them including a 12-year-old girl who is 3 months pregnant. And she's likely going to have a cesarean section because her body is simply not developed enough to give birth. And that's another thing. They're afraid of the potential of her having to give birth and then develop VVF. So what about the funding? Let's talk about that.
I want to take a moment to just speak to you all because I can see that this stuff is heavy, and that's why I was saying it's heavy work. And I can imagine being a parent, like witnessing these stories. It's there's something very painful about listening to children's stories, and we see a lot of them. And I don't know if you guys would have seen like this case that happened a couple months ago, where she had been sexually assaulted by, we don't know, but she had been drugged, and the mom tried to get justice, and they said there's no evidence, there's no DNA, so there's nothing we can do, and they dropped the case. And I think it's so frustrating, and maybe that speaks into the organizations, is that we're having to fill the gaps that our government and service deliveries aren't doing. We're having to support, individuals and people and victims, their loved ones and survivors, because the government has not been doing that, because the law enforcement and courts are not doing that for them. And so we've had to take on such an active role. And like you said, it's difficult because we don't get funding. I mean, Women for Change is a 5-person team. And within our team, we're not getting paid like livable wages. We get paid, what can be afforded, and it's not for lack of wanting to. And Sabrina, she's our founder, and she's so generous. She'll skip paying herself to make sure that we get paid. And it's I keep saying it's not glamorous work. We're not this multi-million-dollar corporation, and often it's organizations like ours that don't have any money, that don't have any funding, that tend to be working overtime trying to get things done because we have such limited resources. And so this shutdown was such a big moment for us because we got to see such international engagement and reaction to the shutdown, and having people show support because they believed in our vision. And had we had funding and opportunities like that, we might have been able to do more, because something we've also wanted to do is be able to go into communities that don't have, the privilege of having comprehensive sexual education, that don't have knowledge around gender-based violence, teaching and educating and providing insight. And we can't do those kind of things if we can't even afford to pay salaries for people to just live purely on their salaries. It's really frustrating, because we are doing work that I think the government should be doing. And someone said it to me, and they're like, hopefully there will come a day when your organization doesn't need to exist. And that is truly the hope, is that one day we don't need to, because that means we've handled and we're dealing with the crisis properly.
So we had our South African correspondent on Friday. She was at one of the protests in Johannesburg, and there was a young girl there. Let's take a look at this.
Men, especially men, have tormented women a lot, and it's enough. I've been tormented by men since I was a child, and I will say it's enough. Enough is enough. We have to stop this. The government must stop. The government must fight for women. The government must give us the justice that we need, the justice that I need for my case, because nothing was done with my story.
A young girl like this should never have to join a protest and say that men have been tormenting her since she was a child, and she's still a child. She should never have to speak out and march for her right to exist as a girl in any country, anywhere here on the continent. And I'm so sorry, this is not an easy conversation. Cameron, we really need to emphasize the scale of the issue that South Africa faces in relation to gender-based violence. And I think it's the data that continues to speak for us when we have these conversations. Now, the country's femicide rate is 5 times the global average. 5 times the global average. One woman is murdered every 3 hours. An average of 146 sexual offenses are reported per day in South Africa. It is estimated that more than 95% of sexual offenses go unreported. South Africa has the 4th highest death rate from interpersonal violence of 183 countries, the highest outside a war zone. There are not just numbers behind these. This is women, girls, mothers, daughters, sisters, wives, aunties, grandmothers, loved ones. And the factor at the center is men and boys. So Cameron, how do you plan to engage men, boys, and even traditional leaders and religious leaders to shift cultural attitudes that enable gender-based violence? How do we engage them? That's a question we are asking ourselves, even here in Nigeria. So how are you answering that question in South Africa?
I think it's again, like I think I mentioned a bit earlier when we speak to intergenerational trauma and the passing down of this thinking. And something that is so important, I think, is to make sure these conversations include men. I think often they can say, no, you're excluding us from this conversation. You don't want us to be a part of this. And the reality is it's not about excluding them. It's about the fact that these conversations are being centered around the group that is most impacted. And that to them feels like exclusion. And what in reality we're saying is we want allyship, We want them to be able to recognize these behaviors and these patterns. We want them to be able to call out their friends, call out their family, call out their colleagues. We want them to be aware of the dynamics so that they can speak up on behalf of women who aren't in those spaces. Like it's asking them to do some real internal reflection and take accountability of what their role can be in this, and recognizing that they might not be the perpetrators. And I think that's important for them to know that there's a spectrum of violence. You have repeat offenders, you have once-off offenders, but there's a good chunk of them that still exist. And that chunk speaks to the people that remain friends with them, the people that laugh about it, the people that kind of ignore it but are staying friends with these people, the people that don't say anything and stop being friends but they don't call it out. Those people are still upholding a system where we have the small group of people that are the people that stand up against it, call it out, speak up on it. Like those are the way we want the men to be. We want them to call these spaces out because men listen to other men. And when we have men supporting the movements and they're supporting, the work that we're doing, it makes such a difference. And I think that speaks to what we're calling for as men to recognize their power and role in influencing other men.
Well, Cameron, we actually need to go on a break now, but let's just hope that the men that are watching this, will in time, get up and speak on this. Now, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we will continue. Stay with us.
Thank you very much for staying with us on Jasiri today. Even though the topics are heavy hitting, for the next 15 or 14 days, you'd have to bear with us because we will be putting a very big spotlight on the matter of gender-based violence. Yes. Now that South Africa has officially declared gender-based violence a national disaster, the real work begins. A declaration alone does not save lives. Implementation does. It requires coordinated action across policing, justice, healthcare, education, and community structures, backed by funding, accountability, and measurable outcomes. Now, let's just, Cameron is still with us. I want to ask, how will South Africans know whether this declaration is working? Because when it is measurable, it makes it easier for people to grasp. So what are the measurable outcomes you are expecting? Or what is your tracking pattern? Is it between 3, 6, or 12 months, or even a shorter time? How do you want to measure, whether this declaration is working?
I think it's hard to say within government spaces that I think they have their own kind of timeline, which is why we spoke to needing reports and transparency on the exact plan. Because, for example, the National Strategic Plan was supposed to happen from 2020 to 2030. They did a 90-day GBV blitz that was supposed to happen earlier this year, which obviously is in the 3 months. So they have to tell us what time frame they are expecting to do this within. And then I think as a community and within South Africa, we then hold them accountable to that. So they need to say, look, this is a full exact breakdown on exactly what's going to happen. If it's in the first month, we are collecting all the stakeholders, we're developing the steering committee, and we're analyzing the current status of the country. And then in the second month, we're now going to be deciding how to implement funds and allocate this and do this, and giving us reports for each of those parts of the process. That's what we're wanting to see, is real transparency and clarity on details. And that's why I said the audits and reports are so important, because we need to know exactly what it is they're planning to do. And should they not do those things in the timeline that they've given us, then we have a problem. Then we have something to say. You said you would do this in 6 months. What the heck is going on? You haven't dealt with it. And I think another measure obviously will be the statistics. We do statistics every quarter. So we should be seeing a drop in the numbers should this be implemented effectively.
I love that you mentioned statistics. They know I'm the data person here. And one of the statistics comes from the Human Services Research Council. And we have the statistics of women. But I think it's interesting we put statistics regarding men on the table. Now, among the men surveyed by the council, around 2.5 million men admitted to committing physical, intimate partner violence during their lifetime. Men aged between 25 to 34 had the highest self-reported perpetration at 20.5%, followed by men aged 35 to 49 at 17.6%. So the data stares us in the face. It shows us that men themselves know what they're doing, and it also shows us an age range. And I say that because just the day before the protests, President Ramaphosa had told the G20 summit that South Africa had declared gender-based violence and femicide a national crisis in 2019. A national crisis in 2019. In a message to the president, you said, quote, President Cyril Ramaphosa, you failed us. You failed the 5,578 women murdered last year. You failed every survivor who begged for justice and got silence. You failed the mothers who buried their daughters with your promises gathered dust. And now we're in 2025, international pressure. Now the president has declared gender-based violence and femicide a national disaster. I want to put it to you, do you trust the Ramaphosa government to actually move forward on this and not just a situation where they, because you put them into a tight corner and you've shown the international spotlight on them, do you trust the Ramaphosa government to do what needs to be done?
I think that's a very important question. And I mean, I'm also the statistics person in our team because I tend to like numbers to explain things. And something that was scary is we saw a report of about 28% of men in South Africa admitting to having committed rape. And about 46% of those men then admitted to committing multiple rapes. So the fact that they are openly admitting it, and there was a video going around on TikTok of these men that were being interviewed in South Africa, and they were asked, do you rape women? And they were like, yeah, we do that. We do it with our friends. It's a whole thing we do. Like I normally do it with him, and we go around, and it's like an activity for fun that we do. And they were so unbothered by the fact that they were doing this, and they were almost like happy, like it was this hobby that they were doing. And so when it comes to our president and his role, he is putting himself on the chopping block. He admitted this at the G20 Social Summit, which means that he's admitted it to the whole world that he's classifying this as a national disaster. And so there is external pressure as well as internal pressure coming down on him to make sure that he addresses it effectively. So do we fully trust him? No, absolutely not. We will trust him when we see action and results. However, are we giving him the space to do the action? Yes. And I think that's the distinction is we're allowing him to prove that he actually is going to do something. We don't trust that his word is the be all end all.
All right, now, just before we wrap up, Cameron, in 1 minute, looking ahead, can you tell us what does a safer, more gender-just South African society look like in the next 5 to 10 years, especially after this declaration?
Oh, I would say there's no gender-based violence and femicide. And I know it's more complicated than that. Movements like this take time. But I think it comes into a space of women being able to walk freely at night, being able to go out with friends and not be worried if something is going to happen to you when you get in your Uber, not to be afraid of saying no to someone who's approaching you or asking you out, to be able to not have to double check that your trip is being monitored, to be able to go to the store and not be worried when someone's following you, to be able to sit in a room full of men and not fear that this might be the most dangerous situation for you, to just be able to live your day-to-day life without this constant fear that something could happen to you. And I think from a systemic level, should something happen, to know that you trust the systems that are in place to effectively manage the things that come up, to effectively protect you and to keep you safe, and to know that you are protected and can be cared for within this country. I think those are the things we want.
Cameron, thank you. Thank you for your time. And thank you for the work that you do. We can't imagine what it takes to do this work, and we can understand having to occasionally step back from the work that you do, but thank you so much. This is a conversation that many of us will keep with us for the foreseeable future, beyond the 16 days of activism, and beyond that, beyond the decorations, beyond the activism, beyond oranging the world. We're asking and we're demanding for change, from Nigeria to South Africa and everywhere else. Cameron, thank you once again. We'll see you guys tomorrow.